All right. Good morning, everybody. We'll now start our webinar, our Tech4RegenAg webinar. Thank you all very much for coming. My name is David Santos. I'm a project manager at Food for Sustainability. I would just like to kindly remind you that we will be recording this session. So in case you don't want to appear in your recording, please close your camera. And please use the chat to ask questions and use the microphone when you are given word. And also, if you want to talk during the Q&A, you can use the raise hand function. Also, I would like to invite everybody to follow us on our social media, on LinkedIn, and also visit our website of the project of Tech4RegenAg. So I would just like to give you a short introduction into our project before I pass the word to Simon Kramer, our speaker for the day. So Tech4RegenAg is a project that is co-funded by EIT Food. It is entitled Enabling Technologies for Wider Data-Based Implementation of Regenerative Agriculture in Europe. Tech4RegenAg has 4 partners: BGI, Building Global Innovators, Certifier, Food for Sustainability, and Yatasesic. BGI is an accelerator and developer of sustainable ventures. Certifier is a blockchain certified company, also working in the creation of data spaces to manage data of the agri-food sector. Food for Sustainability is a non-for-profit association dedicated to the implementation of sustainable agriculture projects, and Yatazizik is a research institute dedicated also to the agri-food sector. So our project appears in the overall context of the current agricultural landscape. So with the need to convert agricultural surface of the European Union into organic production by 25% by 2030, and of course, having to deal with the environmental impact of climate change, of conventional farming, soil degradation, biodiversity loss, and also keeping in mind that we want to reduce the amount of chemical inputs and external inputs that are put into the farming system itself, being it fertilizers or pesticides. The project aims to implement a sustainable framework that allows for the adoption of regenerative agriculture with particular emphasis in Southern Europe. So just to give you an idea of our project and what we are working in specifically, we have 6 work packages, one dedicated to education and training, where we are creating synergies with other projects such as Grow of EIT Food, where we are doing some capacity building actions. We have one work package dedicated to pilot design and implementation, where we essentially do pilot studies in real farms, doing a baseline assessment of soil health and creating a set of recommendations that is aimed at both improving the soil health of the farm and also increasing the nutrient density of milk and meat of those farms. We have one work package as well dedicated to the data-driven verification of regenerative agriculture benefits via the creation of data spaces that allows for these cause-effect relationship and the management of this data. We have one work package also dedicated to business creation and relationship with corporates, where we are doing a link between startups that develop technology or services applicable to regenerative agriculture and the work that we are doing in our pilot studies. One work package dedicated to consumer awareness, where we do the assessment of nutrient density of the products that I mentioned earlier, but also do the sensory analysis of these products in comparison to conventional ones. And lastly, we have the policy review work package, which brings us here today. It is a work package where we are designing a set of recommendations and analyzing recommendations that other institutions have provided to the Common Agricultural Policy to introduce regenerative agriculture concepts. So with this, I would like to introduce our speaker for the day, Simon Kramer. He is the co-founder of and executive director of the European Alliance of Regenerative Agriculture. He is a trained political agroeconomist, and he has years of experience in public and private sector consulting, agri-food sustainability, and business strategy farm to fork, SMEs to multinationals, regional administrations to EU Commission. He is a syntropic agroforestry farmer in Sicily. farmer. Whenever you want, Simon, whenever you want, please take it away. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I might say by starting, I am a very shitty farmer, and I also want to apologize. I mean, we are getting better year by year. That's our regeneration, no, but we are still starting from a very, very low benchmark. And yeah, I want to apologize to everyone who was here earlier the week, who I have stolen your time because our connection at the land is very, very poor, unfortunately. I'll share my slides. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the intro, David, and the whole Tech4RegenAg team for having me. I hope, and having us, I hope you see the slides in full screen now. I'll start a little bit broader because in a policy review, I think the first thing we can ask ourselves is, who are we doing policy for? And that is asked already for quite a long time here in Europe, since the days we have firstly tried to overcome our monarchies to have a little bit more co-agency in the development of our policies. And there were the great farmer back in the days who asked, was the earth made to preserve a few coveted proud men to live at ease, or was it made to preserve all her children? And I think the policy is a very decisive lever. And we see also in world history here, you see how the soil carbon stock on Earth developed from about 10,000 before Christ until today, and the global phytomass stock, which is the living plants on this Earth, which then are the core capacities to grow the healthy soils. And we see that when our self-governing policies were basically stewarded for cooperating with each other and cooperating with nature rather than competing with each other and competing with nature, we were a keystone species of our biosphere that rapidly increased biospheric productivity and biodiversity. And then we changed, and since then we are degrading our planet. And it's also, you probably all know, the more broader political economic discourses where we now talk about degrowth economics or donut economics, or which was called in older policy discourse more steady state economics. We think that regenerative agriculture actually is the key for all of this quite detached discourse of political economy, because, for example, in degrowth, yes, we need to degrow a lot of parts of our economics, but we also need to regrow a lot of parts. And the key indicator on if, as a whole political economy of societies, we are regrowing our natural capital or not, is if we are having a positive, what in science is called human appropriated net primary productivity. So if our land use is producing more natural capital than we take out to feed ourselves and our economies. And that's what regenerative agriculture is all about. In the really nerdy talk of our farmers, which we basically try to unite in diversity all the different farming philosophies and practitioners from all farm types and geographies in Europe that try to farm in a way that natural capital is built year on year. And in the really nerdy talk now, we like to say we are regenerating once we are improving year over year. And we are regenerative only when our annual balance is net positive in terms of carbon, water, and climate. And which also connects then, of course, to another work topic I saw of Tech4RegenAg with these all the data and empirics. We are not only 90 pioneering farmers from all over Europe, but of course we are also a movement that is connected with those farmers and with us. As ERA, we focus on cross-sectoral reconciling, and we had a wonderful event in Portugal, which I will show. Then we really focus on scaling out regenerating farming with our own tools directed at supporting farmers directly through education, knowledge, our own farmer-owned data MLV platform and finance consultancy. Then what is the topic of today? Governance for regeneration. So we do a lot of advocacy, then policy design work and the empirics for that and the technological feasibilities of the implementation. And then we very much believe in the means being the end and practicing democracy within ourselves and also improving, basically regenerating our democratic capacities. And we have particular focus on female and young farmers and rural development, and hope to have a systemic approach to transformation that is bottom up, grown from the biodistricts to the bioregions over the nations and Europe. So in terms of policy design, advocacy, discussion, so far we have published 4 major documents. The first one is our joint white paper, where for the first time our farmers define regenerative agriculture for themselves according to 4 principles and several sub-principles. Then last year in April, we published a big policy paper on the future of the common agricultural policy and result-based agri-food policy in general. Then in the beginning of this year, I will show that also we published a very widely supported cross-sectoral response to the Commission's agri-food vision from the perspective of the pioneers of regenerative agriculture, both from farming, the industry and science. And now 2 months ago, we published possibly the largest empirical study on regenerative agriculture, which shows meat to the bones, and I'll show also the results of that in a bit. All the time we know that, you can publish policy papers all day long and nothing will happen. So we are in an advocacy tour throughout Europe. And I know Food for Sustainability and Tech4RegenAg, I suppose, is based also in Portugal. And I think also one of your managers or founders was at our event. We had a wonderful event, for example, in Portugal, where we really hosted cross-sectorally the major farmer associations of Portugal, some of the major pioneers of farming from all different farm types, pioneers of the industry like Bell, who is doing an amazing RegenAg program on the Azores. And then we had people from the government there, specifically from the Policy Design Bureau of the CAP, and really worked one whole day in consensus-based processes on how we could set ourselves up. And now there will come a task force in Portugal working with this cross-sectoral alliance on preparing with the government basically the new agency that the Portuguese and all our European governments will have in 2027, when the new CAP will come, whose biggest change will be basically that the biggest agency for programming the policy design will not be in Brussels anymore, but will be even more at the nation member state level. After the summer break, we go to Vienna, Rome, Berlin, and then next year we have a lot of other stops on the road. So just for an example, in Brussels, this tour stop was a 3-day cross-sectoral event with over 300 stakeholders. We had the director of, from our policy perspectives, now sustainability of the DG Agriculture from the Commission, is Schildhuis. We had an amazing farm visit to Giro's farm doing no-till, diverse cover cropping, on cover crop seeds in Wallonia, 40 minutes outside of Brussels for over 40 years. And then we did really nice workshops on co-creating design. Exactly this response to the Commission's vision, which was then published with this wide cross-sectoral alliance to basically educate the European Commission in the way how their vision could be much more reality-based, technologically innovative, and farmer-centric if they would be able to incorporate more the learnings of the regen pioneers. Then we stopped in Denmark, where we also had a great success bringing together the organics, agroecology, the conservation agriculture movements together with the big corporate players in Denmark, Carlsberg and Arla. And in Denmark, they have now the tripartite agreement, which is a big, I don't know if you are aware, a big government, private-public program to basically try to regenerate landscapes and build climate adaptability in Denmark. Then in Portugal, I mentioned that already at the wonderful Vivid Farms. And now we'll go a little bit more into the technical details. So I'll start talking about our study. This is the results of our phase 2. We're currently fundraising and planning for phase 1. Now we are fundraising and planning for phase 2. In this first phase, we analyzed 78 of the most pioneering farmers all over Europe. And of those 78 farmers, we analyzed 3 fields, and those fields in a complete input-output assessment in standard total factor productivity from 2021 to 2023. And then we did a satellite analysis of those 3 pioneering fields compared to 9 random fields of neighbors in the same pedoclimatic zone, and those analyses we ran over 5 years. The whole study, we did kind of a self-made science program because we wanted to be much faster than standard science procedures, as well as more holistic and not ceteris paribus monocausal bound. So we had, those are only 4 of our independent reviewers of the study. I think we had way over 20, which you can see in the first pages of the study, just to show that some of the lead figures of the conservation agriculture movement, of the organic movement, of the UN environmental program, and the former agriculture minister in Europe. What we designed there is basically the Regenerating Full Productivity Index, which grew out of many discussions with the OECD, also with the people of the European Commission. In Europe, we ran our analysis of agroeconomics basically on 2 major models. One is a French model, the other one is a German model. Globiome and Capri is a German model. And in those models, and the OECD and also the USDA, they all use a total factor productivity methodology in which they want to assess all the production factors of agriculture, so land, labor, and then basically the inputs and the outputs to assess efficiency and effectiveness. However, that methodology does not include anything that does not have a market price. So no social factors, no environmental factors, and also the methodology is inherently biased against rural livelihoods because you basically achieve the highest scores if you have the best efficient labor use, which means you spend the least on agricultural labor in your production equation compared to your outputs. And then we wonder why we need to do subsidy programs for rural livelihoods if we steward the whole agricultural sector to have the least possible labor costs. We tried to innovate, but in a way that it is connected to those existing programs. And we also fed our model with the same data, so mainly Eurostat data in this study. And we include all factors of production, so not only those that have a market price, but also water, carbon, biodiversity. We do not have such a heavy focus on the efficiency of labor because we actually believe that agricultural labor, the revitalization of rural livelihoods, is essential to increasing our natural capital. Instead, our core denominator is land, which is also the most limiting production factor in the end, especially for us here in Europe. And then we benchmark the innovators, and you will see that later, against the country average. And when we do the on-farm measurements to be able to include all factors of production, we do that from the perspective of the farmer. So while doing that, we want to have the least possible paperwork for farmers, and we want to assess only measurable results. So we are not working with proxy where the farmer tells us, yeah, you know, I did cover crops this year. And then we do kind of assume the average impact of cover crops out of a meta-analysis of literature reviews on its impact on water, climate, and biodiversity, because that's super, super robust and not context specific at all. So if I do a cover crop or not, actually the impact of a shitty cover crop to a very good cover crop can be much bigger than doing a cover crop or doing a shitty cover crop, in the sense of if I just plant a cover crop with 2 species, which is poorly seeded, in comparison to doing a more than 20 species cover crop that's seed coded and then perfectly seeded at a good time with a good direct seeder, the impacts, the results on our ecosystem services and also on the agronomy for the next cash crops, most probably, are completely different. So we really assess the results of those cover crops via the whole year or the whole photosynthesis that those cover crops produced, as well as the soil cover they produced. What we then see comparing the 78 pioneering farmers over 3 years to the average farmers of the countries where those pioneering farmers farm is that basically the narrative of the Green Deal that we have been uttering and really that were believed only 1-2 years ago, and in most science spaces, economic spaces, still today, that basically if we reduce synthetic fertilizers by more than 20% and pesticides by more than 50%, we necessarily have yield reduction. That was an assumption that was not even questioned by the best agroecological science, which we also discuss in the report 2 years ago. Well, we now show that empirically, that's already disproved. Already today, our farmers, basically the best farmers, can produce 33% more food and ecosystem services with less inputs. They do that by producing a lot more photosynthesis, which then can substitute, for example, in nitrogen for synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, or also in pesticides in terms of microbiome health and then plant pest resistance. And they achieve these productivity gains with yield parity. So we converted all yields in kilocalories and proteins per hectare and see that on average, the pioneers produce 2% less, so marginally less. However, they use 61% less synthetic fertilizers, 75% less pesticides in total toxicity, and have 20% more profit per hectare as they produce more or less the same with significantly less inputs. Which is even more impressive, that they produce more or less the same yields while not using any non-European feed imports. So all of the livestock breeders and growers, ranchers we had in the study used, if they used feed from which was not grown on their own farm, they used it from their immediate region and country. Only one chicken grower in Spain, which are the 2% here, imported some of his soy from southern France. So it's not the same country. That's why we're only at 98% national feed, but 100% European feed, whereas standard European livestock is heavily dependent on imported feed, mostly from South America. We then create this regenerating full productivity index, in which we have decided by the farmer an equal weighing of all production indicators. We then see the relative difference per indicator between the pioneers or whomever we want to benchmark versus the average of the farmers. Or we could also benchmark one farmer group against another, or a region versus another, and then we see the benchmark category size. Just to show you a little bit how that is achieved, here is an overview of Peter Fröhlich, crazy farmer who until like 7-8 years ago was still farming conventionally. His dad was always holding the yield records in their region, which is a high plateau around Zurich, one of the highest yielding sugar beet regions in the world. Peter has now highly advanced agronomic innovations implemented in his farming systems. So he's doing strip tilling and direct drilling, and he's using 2 cover crops with more than 20 species. So he's terminating the cover crop before it's going into the generative phase. So before the roots, instead of giving sugars exudates to the microbiome, take from the microbiome to feed its grains. And then he plants the second one. And by that, he's massively inoculating the soil microbiome. And you see also his cover crops are just fat as super big. And he's now producing more sugar beet yields in one of the highest intensity, capital intensive, input intensive, best soil sugar beet regions in the world, with almost 70% less synthetic fertilizers, 88% less pesticides, and half of the fuel. More yields in a completely standard cash crop. And then, of course, he's also making more money farming like this. Here's another case, which is like the livestock question. We often hear the argument, if we graze so much, we will use so much more land, and then it's inefficient way to produce protein for humanity. Actually, we don't see that. So Christine is a wonderful farmer from the south of Germany, doing holistic management and mob grazing and low stress stockmanship for over 15 years, I believe. And we compare her way of producing beef to a standard way of producing beef in Bavaria, which is still mostly 100% of the life in stable, 80% or even more grain-fed diet. You see them on the top right here, whereas Christina feeds almost completely grass and a little bit of hay in winter. The standard feed mix in Bavaria is about 70% maize silage, rapeseed, soy, and wheat, and some hay. And then we compare basically the inputs that are used to produce relatively these feed mix, and of course the inputs that are used for the animals in terms of medicines and antibiotics. And we see that Christina is basically using no inputs anymore, no antibiotics, half of the fuel of the standard production way. Christina is also not using any anti-warmers anymore, which is extremely important for our grassland ecosystems' health and productivity. And while doing that, she is producing only 15% less per hectare in terms of meat, while having an input reduction of close to 100%. And that's extremely impressive. And then, of course, she's almost making 50% more money than a standard CAFO beef grower. Then we aggregate basically single farmer cases of the pioneers per country and compare them to the average of the country, which we deduce from the Eurostat data banks, fused with the 9 comparison satellite field analysis to the 3 fields per pioneer. So here in Italy, we have 7 farmers compared to the general average of the country, and our Italian pioneers produce about 9% less yields. However, they also use 0 feed from outside of Italy, which is quite impressive if you are familiar with the dairy industry of Italy, producing a lot of mozzarellas. If you are familiar with also a huge chicken industry in Italy, that's all produced with a lot of non-Italian feed inputs. And on average, one could almost say our Italian pioneers are close to organics, so they almost use no synthetic fertilizers, 80% less pesticides. And then we come to water, climate, biodiversity. Here I can also explain that in this first phase of our study, we were very cash limited. So we didn't have money to buy satellites which were not publicly accessible. which is why our surface temperature analysis, we have here star, because with the publicly accessible satellites, unfortunately, the picture of the surface temperature is taken at a resolution of 30 by 30 meters, and it's taken at 10 a.m. in the morning. We all know, of course, that if you really want to see how different is the land heating in the summer, it's better you take the temperature measuring at 4 or 5 p.m. or 3 p.m. and not at 10 a.m. Then to evapotranspiration, this also needs explanation, because usually one would think, we all now understand that evapotranspiration is completely decisive for cooling our lands in climate change, for producing rain. It's basically the capacity of the skin of our planet to sweat. If we can't sweat, we're also overheating. That's basically what's happening to us in climate change. 1% more evapotranspiration would seem little. However, if you have 1% more evapotranspiration with 25% more photosynthesis, that means that the water efficiency, so the health of the plants growing that photosynthesis, has increased massively. So it's actually a quite great figure to have 1% more evapotranspiration while we have 25% more photosynthesis. Then we now come a little bit to the policy part. We understand that, for example, for regenerating validation or for holistic agroeconomic models that incorporate ecological factors, we can look at the whole swath of production factors like we do in the Regenerating Full Productivity Index. However, for coupling, for example, our direct payments in the CAP to ecological and agronomic performance, we cannot do that because our payment agencies, for example, already right now are not able to handle so much information. And also the farmers can't handle so much information for these parts of our policy. So we are looking and have analyzed holistic proxy indicators who have a continuous strong correlation with the entirety of the RFP, but we can measure at an extreme cost efficiency and can operationalize without any paperwork demands to the farmers. And we identify the two indicators of whole year photosynthesis per area of land and whole year soil cover. And we believe that those two integrated speak very good and robustly for the overall development of the RFP performance of a farm. And just some analysis here, you see the two curves of all of the 78 pioneering pharma fields photosynthesis versus the context-specific random comparison fields. And we see, of course, that they are highly outperforming the average farmers. We see that in extreme years, which are only amounting and getting worse in climate change, the performance is relatively even better. We see also that the performance gap is increasing over the last 6 years. And then we see something super exciting. To me personally, I must say something as hopeful as we see seldom in these days in our planet. Because you see basically until 2023, the curves always develop in balance, so to say. Because if you are able to produce more photosynthesis, even if you're on a higher niveau, always depends very much on the growing conditions of each year. No, was it a wet year? Was it a very drought year? This impacts. Was it super hot year? Was it a good year? And so forth. This impacts no matter if you're a good farmer or if you're a farmer that still has a lot more to learn in the performance. And basically it's coherent until 2023. So you see that in 2022 to 2023, in both curves, both are improving. So 2023 was probably a better growing year than 2022. However, in 2024, the average farmers are decreasing again. So it was a more difficult year. But for the first time, although the average farmers are decreasing, the pioneers are further improving, which can be interpreted basically as the inflection point of the S-curve of regeneration. No, everything grows in S-curves, and at some point we go from normal growth into the exponential growth. And we have a lot of scientists, especially in Germany, where I'm from, who even claim, now climate change is so tough, we can't even build soil health anymore. We can just do the best we can and not lose further soil health. Well, that's bonkers. We can, and we are exponentially improving even in the worst of, or the for now worst climate change conditions. So what's at stake now? Unfortunately, the pioneers are not the average. We are maybe at 3% of all the farmers. We are losing anyone who would be doing it because our generational renewal on farms is not taking place. I'll jump over this now fast and you will get the deck. So our crops, our yields are imploding in resilience. What do we think all the farmers need to be able to embark on their regeneration journey? Less bureaucratic workload, less paperwork, less confusion, so they can really focus on farms, on increasing photosynthesis, less risk in the transition. They need more planning security and better deals. Now, an eco scheme can change every year. How is a farmer going to plan if actually they should be planning ecosystems over successional stages, not only from one growing cycles, but maybe even over trophic scales to a forest? We need better knowledge. The agronomic knowledge that is now there needs to be distributed in a conventional farmer accessible way, and we need more land access for all those who are willing to try and give their best in regenerating land use. We are trying to grow that by harmonizing all the different data demands that arrive at the farm gate for the farmer. We are doing that in trying to inoculate the mindset shift of bureaucrats, of farmers, and of the private sector to go from prescribing the farmer practices of what they ought to do to just remunerating and appreciating the year-over-year improvement results that the farmers are doing so that they have the agency of their context and the motivation and self-learning feedback loops. We are currently hosting a mutual consultation process on result-based agri-food policy, kind of with the pioneers of our public servants in Europe, among them also 3 former agricultural ministers. We just published with the European Economic and Social Committee, which is kind of a consensus of the European civil society opinion on regenerative agriculture, which also publishes a very precise list of KPIs, so we can finally go beyond this all-numbing question of definition. But there we have very simple, clear KPIs, year-over-year, outcome KPIs over a longer time span. And we basically believe in Europe it can be operationalized also now with the publishing of the new CAP proposal last week. Couple our direct, so far only area coupled direct payments to the year-over-year improvement of the farmers on whole year photosynthesis and soil cover. They have no bureaucracy. They know exactly where we need to steward for. We don't prescribe them anything, and they get a performance bonus on how well they perform. And then we need a more fully coupled innovation and transition risk reducing environment for each single farmer, for which we think a whole IFP assessment or the KPIs as now outlined in the ESC opinion are functional, where we can get transition insurance for each farmer, where basically all the experiments in the first 4 years of the transition are insured. If something they try, like direct seeding, fails, they got the cost reimbursed. If it works, not so much. We can build secondary supply chain standards for RegenAg validation and claims on the same MRV and data highway. And then we need to couple the crisis relief payments, which now our states gives to farmers when there's a big crisis, without any demands on them actually adapting to have more resilience in the next crisis. to the same kind of MRV figures. And with that, I'll thank you very much. And sorry, I left not so much time for questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think I speak for everybody when I said that it was a very interesting and even inspiring talk. Very, very impacting results for sure. I have a bit of a question for you regarding the how accepting are policymakers of these ideas. So you want to introduce regenerative concepts into policy. You have all this work done where you are proving how it works. Are there still barriers that you need to overcome? What are they? And how are you approaching it?
Yeah, the barriers are infinite. No, no, specifically, I can take the example of Portugal. So in Portugal now, actually the responsible people in the agricultural ministry for designing the CAP, they are quite open. And we have still 1.5 years for growing their self-thinking capacity and so forth. And that is what needs to happen. They themselves, because they have their own satellite people, they themselves need to learn with the satellite programs to play with these indicators. And that's also what we are trying to teach them. And that is one hurdle. So they basically need to relearn the tools they already have to understand these indicators and result-based stuff. Because so far, what we have in Europe as result-based agri-food policy and some eco schemes and so forth, it's not fully result-based because it's often, I mean, some are result-based, for example, species in high nature value grasslands and stuff, but they are very reductionistically result-based. That's why we speak with policymakers about strategic result-based indicators. And once they grow the confidence and the technological capacity with their own satellite people, we can move on that. And I think for that, we are doing good advances because now, for example, in Portugal, when we have the cross-sectoral alliance of some scientists, but most importantly of all, the pharma associations, including the more conservative pharma associations, and the industry, together approaching the agriculture ministry and saying, guys, in 1 year, you will redesign our national policy. Let's start talking because this paperwork stuff, like we got to change something. And they are all now super aware we got to change something because the yields are imploding. It's not only anymore, you know, some NGO people saying, oh, the yields will implode in the future thanks to climate change. Now they see it on their finance books and they are awake. And then there's a second problem, which is the payment agencies. And the payment agencies are almost a bigger problem. So I don't know if you know, payment agencies are basically more or less local or regional bureaucracies which operationalize the actual payment and verification and monitoring of our CAP, or agricultural policy. And these people are very path dependent. I hope no one is here because also I want to say they are very innovative payment agencies. So we are working with a payment agency in Finland, which is super important always because it's like with farmers. Now you can change the mind and the beliefs of people in the payment agency only if you show them other people of another payment agencies that do it. It's like with a farmer. I can only convince a dairy farmer if I bring him another dairy farmer. Otherwise, I mean, forget it. And the payment, they unfortunately have a much bigger path dependency and vested interest in the way we are doing things now, even than the programming office in the agricultural ministry. But the agricultural ministry in the end will not program any policy design to which the payment agency basically strikes. And that is still something, in my understanding for this CAP now, we have 1.5 years. And in each country, we need to grow, like this awareness must grow. And then one must basically do kind of task 4 rounds with the payment agencies to explain how they will not lose their job to satellites. Some will. Actually also, you know, it's a lot of taxpayer money. I mean, a lot of the money that our taxpayers supposedly should go to help farmers or help ecosystem services with farmers, go, of course, for payment agencies because it's designed so bureaucratically heavy, all on without utilizing newer technologies. Sorry, also a long answer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Simon. We have some questions in the chat. I will be reading them for you. So from Belinda, are there plans to change some crops to drought-resistant ones? For example, millets. Millets are a very nutritious food. It will take education and adjustment. Expertise would come from India or Africa, where they are familiar with drought management.
Yes, totally. So, for example, I'm growing sorghum here, which I think can be a game changer for Sicilian life. I'm in Sicily, so we also have 40 degrees and nothing is growing. A part of sorghum in terms of grains and livestock feed. One problem with that is always the breeding history. I mean, even in Europe, for example, you know, in Switzerland, for example, they do more or less 6 to 7 tons of wheat yields right now, whereas in Belgium, they do 11 tons of wheat yield with more or less similar quality of soils and rain. And that is only because of the breeding history. So in Switzerland, they kind of stopped breeding. So even if we import the millet from somewhere else, then the millet has to perform comparatively to something like mostly corn, probably. I don't know where the person is from, where the question is from. So then it must somehow be competitive in yields. And that's oftentimes not only a question of the breeding of that crop itself, but then also the context-specific breeding. So if we do that work and we can do that fast, then yeah, totally.
All right. Now from Ana Farinha, I understand that photosynthesis can be measured using remote sensing tools. Is the NDVI index commonly used for this, or are there more precise methods available? Could you explain this a bit more in detail?
Yes, I can go into that. I can also please refer you to our report because I think we do at least 5 pages of discussions on that because yes, that's of course super decisive if we work with that on terms of policy. Also, I want to say before, for sure there is, I mean, with us at the farmers, we like to say good enough for now, safe enough to try. That's also a framing I would like to put for these satellite indicators. So they are in no way perfect, and we can further improve them. However, as we always compare context specifically per pedoclimatic region, we believe that the inaccuracies, and we tested for that also, are evenly distributed. So even if the satellite is off, relatively off, it's quite similarly off in the same region. So then it's fair for all the farmers and the relative performance on which they are assessed is fair. So we also are, in this whole report, we stay very much with the relative performance of the indicators, and we step back from needing to, for example, quantify down to the decimal part of the carbon in kilograms that this NDVI would be the quantified signifier for. Instead, we just use the relative difference, kind of. And there is, you know, now I forget it. What is it? Yeah, there is one. So there is I have to look it up. Sorry. There's one thing where we are going beyond, let's say, the resolution of NVDI. I forgot the acronym. Too many acronyms in my life. Which is good, which can be very good. Like, for example, we did this whole analysis with AgriPurpose, which is basically a farmer-facing tool for doing precision soil mapping and then having an innovation platform for the farmers where the farmers actually can see the photosynthesis. So when the farmers do field trials, we see the photosynthesis change every 6 days. So you actually see, I don't know, I did this foliar spraying, I did this foliar spraying. So the farmer sees where in the plant growth curve. So we can go much more specific than we go in this report. And then also it's a balance of costs and needs.
Yeah, and a
I
very
hope
important
that's
subject for policy, all these MRV frameworks. So now from Alicia Abendroth, very inspiring talk. How do you propose tackling generational renewals changes in Europe?
Yeah, hallelujah. The easy answer is making agriculture sexy again. I think we are on a good way to that. The other answer is, I mean, now we will see, because the CAP proposal last week somehow put very much in doubt our current payments for generational renewal. Of course, they say it's not so, but in a sense it is. In our thinking, from a very simple perspective, we want to operationalize, in a perfect world, these hectare-based payments on your annual photosynthesis improvement in a progressive way, like progressive income tax. And that's in two ways. So the less land you have, you get a multiplier per payment per hectare. The more land you have, if you have more than 300 hectares, each additional hectare, you get a discount, which then is redistributed to the small farmers, and the same with young farmers. So that basically, if you are a young farmer, you have no paperwork, but even if you start farming on 4 hectares and you improve your photosynthesis by 15% per year, which is quite possible if you, really focus on a small drop on land, you don't do big arable farming, you could get, even with the current money, something like 4,000, 5,000 euros per hectare without any bureaucracy. So then you can actually make a living and basically start a job on those hectares. I mean, I have a lot of friends. We all know a lot of young people who start farming. They start with some 3 hectares. Land is expensive. Maybe they rent it and so forth. And then currently you get $150 per hectare. Whereas a person who owns 10,000 hectares for their 9,999 hectare also gets 150 hectares. So we want to combine that in a kind of progressive, socially just way. But that's, of course, an even more difficult policy challenge than only coupling it to performance.
All right. Very interesting indeed. So we have another question here from Gaddy Kenny. So could you characterize some European countries in terms of excellence on how quick they are progressing in terms of systems change in relation to farmers, research, state policy and state level organization?
I try, Gadi. Good to see you. I know we got into this at Groundswell a little bit.
And especially, Simon, if you could shed a light on France, that they seem to be hiding in the shade.
Yeah, I mean, they are cocky French people, so they don't say anything which is not in French, so no one else can understand it. No, I mean, I'm of course just joking. Somehow it's like that. So France, if you all remember, basically, and that should shed light for all of us, in around 2010, had an agricultural minister who was actually a farmer. And that was the agricultural minister who, in the Paris Climate Agreement, also started the 1 per 1,000, 1 per mil initiative, which stated that if we only increase soil organic carbon by 0.4% per year, we can abate climate change and so forth. And that minister focused completely on the state-influenced education programs of agriculture. And that kind of planted the seed that now, 10, 15 years later, they really harvest from that. Because just to compare to Germany, in Germany, our apprenticeship programs, our university programs for farmers, and our state-driven agronomy consultancy programs, they are at ground zero when it comes to regenerative agriculture or even agroecology, because for several reasons we also have quite some companies in Europe that like to sell stuff for degenerative agriculture. And so all our farmers still come out of that with no knowledge, no technical knowledge on no-till, no technical knowledge on some meaningful cover cropping as the really most basic things, you know, not even going to foliar spray, agroforestry, holistic grazing, whatever, like these minimal, nothing. In France now, they have put the whole, in France, they don't talk so much of regenerative agriculture, but more agroecology, which is to me just semantics really there. But they have a great history, and this agricultural minister also fused what we try also in EARA, this kind of alienation between conservation agriculture, so bigger crop farmers who maybe do no-till and cover crops, to agroecology farmers, to market gardeners, to CSAs, to ranchers. And they really have great education programs. And now, for example, also, I don't know if you know the PADV, Pure en Agriculture du Vivant, they have a regeneration index. I think they have more than 7,000 farmers in that. They have insurances, water agencies. It's a great cross-stakeholder alliance. We are in close discourse with them because they also, so their regeneration index was still developed a few years back. So they still have a lot of kind of practice assessment in there, but they are very willing to improve and learn. So that's a great example in France. And then I would say in Finland, there's also a great, also it's a small country, no, and there's a great collaboration of a farmer movement with the pioneering public servants. So they actually do continuous joint sessions on trying to think about the future of more result-based, remote-sensed agricultural policy. And they also have a great database on which they feed, because they, from the BSAG movement, Baltic Sea Action Group, they have a very long field trial where the Meteorological Institute of the Helsinki University is collecting data, remote sense data, on which they can now basically test run whatever designs they want to do. And then I would say also Belgium in Wallonia, because in Belgium, they also have a continuous exchange between the agricultural ministry and a group of pioneering farmers, which is not just from one farm type, but which is pioneering organic farmer, pioneering CA farmer, pioneering ranchers, which co-identify with RegenAg, and then they have some discourses. But there, as I hear from some of our farmers who are in that group, it's still a little bit longer journey to really excite the policymakers. I think that's 3 examples, yeah, where I would say I see good stuff happen. I'll go to Finland actually next week, so then I could say more on.
All right. Fantastic. So there is another question from Gonçalves. He or she is asking, who are you working with? Are you working with somebody in the Ministry of Agriculture in Portugal?
Yeah, you are already noticing memory is none of my virtues. So I have to look up the name of this wonderful fellow. Yes, there was a very nice guy who came to our event, who is basically now this nodal point. I mean, it always works like this, you know, just as among the farmers, among our public servants, there's very few pioneers who dare to think outside the box, go to talk to the farmers and so forth. And they then try to organize meetings with more of their colleagues, where we bring more of the pioneering movements. And there's a wonderful colleague in Portugal whose name I now forgot. If gladly write me an email and I can connect you, or if you want to join that task force in Portugal too, please reach out.
All right. So if anybody else wants to ask another question, please, let's have a final question from anybody in the audience if you want to. You have one from Nadine, a bit off topic, to close the session. What are your thoughts on agrivoltaic farms, solar panels, and regenerative farming?
Yeah, you know, I had to come here to this bar because my solar panels are somehow, it's too much sun for the solar panels. They are striking. I think it's like, you know, it's not the cow, it's the how. It's the same thing for solar panels. If and to me it's very simple. On the land or in your farm system, the solar panels help to increase overall photosynthesis over the whole year, amazing. If it's degrading the capacity for photosynthesis of that place, then it's not a good idea.
All right. So with that, I would like to thank you, Simon, very much for your time. Very interesting talk. Thank you all. I would remind you again to follow us on social media, follow our website for where we will, in principle, post this recording, and we will see you all next time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, friends.
Bye bye.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.